You're listening to the Grassroots Church podcast. We're a Jesus-centered community in Thunder Bay, Ontario. You can learn how to participate more by going to our website at grassroots.church.
I assume I'm the only one uncomfortable with that picture. Actually, being black and white hides some of the gray in the beard, so that's all right. I'm just not used to seeing my face like that. I was here last year. It's always an honor and a thrill when I get invited out to do stuff like this, and it's really special when you get invited back. So thanks so much for having me back. That says something, I suppose. I just want to start, for my own sake, I guess. I have a lot to say. There's a lot I want to do this morning, actually, or a lot of things I want to try to do. But I just want to take a second or a moment, maybe even a minute, and just sort of take a breath, silence ourselves, and remember where we are and why we're here, and just sort of stop and calm ourselves. What's the name of the gentleman? I can't see him anymore that was playing. Matt? That was fantastic. I could have listened to that all morning. You maybe said better things than I'll ever say, but that was lovely. Thank you for that. Good time just to let it sink in a bit. And if you want to say a prayer for today, for yourself, if you're willing, say a prayer for me that my words are actually God's words. So just take a minute and sort of calm ourselves before we get going here. All right, thanks. When I was a kid, before we had milk bags and milk cartons and stuff like that, the way we got our milk was in these big plastic jugs. I guess they were 2-liter jugs. I don't know, big geometric things with a little handle up on the side near the top. And the only way you could tell what kind of milk was in it was by the foil cap that was on the top. When I was a kid, it was either pink or blue whole milk or skim milk. Those were sort of the only options at the time. And then when we were done with them, you could take them to the local store and get a refund, a dime or a nickel or whatever it was, probably a nickel. And when I was 9 or 10 years old, the closest corner store, convenience store, was about a 5 to 10 minute walk away from where I lived. And when I was that age, 9, 10 years old, I was allowed to go to that store by myself. It's not like I needed anything at the store or even necessarily wanted anything. But when you're 9 or 10 years old and you're given that kind of freedom, that kind of liberty, you take it. You grab on with both hands. So the rest of this story I want to tell like it's a scene from a movie, because that's the way I remember it in my mind's eye. That's the way I picture it. And that's the way I like to retell it. So the first shot, the first scene is the image of me, a 9 or 10-year-old me walking to the store by myself, just enjoying being outside, enjoying the weather and that sort of thing, walking down the street alone. When all of a sudden, over my shoulder, I heard, "Hey!" And I turned and looked and saw Andrew riding towards me on his bicycle. So Andrew was about 6 years older than me, and he was a complete bully. Nothing else, full stop. I was terrified of this guy. At that point in your life, at that point in my life, everybody I knew was very one-dimensional, right? Everything was very black and white. There was no gray. People were either nice or funny or scary. Those were the only options. And Andrew was definitely scary. And so he's riding his bike towards me, and he's got like 6 of these empty milk jugs threaded between his fingers on either side of his handlebars. And I just turned on my heel and kept walking, pretending that I didn't see him, hoping against hope that he would just leave me alone. So the next shot, the next scene in the film is the one that seems to kind of widen, where the screen looks like it's widening as Andrew pulls up beside me on his bicycle. And when he's right beside me, he slammed on his brakes and he dropped all these milk jugs. And he said, "Look what you made me do." And in my mind, in my inner monologue, which you, of course, can hear because it's like a scene from a movie, I'm saying stuff like, "Buzz off, Andrew. Leave me alone. I didn't do anything." But what I was actually saying was much closer to, "Sorry about that, Andrew. Let me help you with those. Let me get those for you." But before I even had a chance to be charitable, he's off his bicycle and he, 2 hands shoves me into my little 9-year-old chest and sent me head over tea kettle into the ditch on the side of the road. the next shot, the next scene is a close-up of Andrew coming in for the kill, coming in to finish me off. He's got a clenched fist and clenched teeth and crazy eyes. When all of a sudden, over his shoulder, we heard, "Hey!" And we both turned and looked and saw my brother and 6 of his buddies riding towards us on their bicycles. My brother was a year older than Andrew. And because this is like a scene from a movie, again, they're in perfect V formation, with my brother at the very front, while the theme song from the Magnificent Seven began to mount. Bum, 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 bum. By the time they got to where Andrew was, where I was surrounded in these empty milk jugs, Andrew and his bicycle are long gone. And I'm laying in the ditch, surrounded in empty milk jugs, covered in tears. But this is the scene, this is the shot in the movie where the clouds seem to part, where the sky is bluer, the air is cleaner than anything I've experienced. It's incredible, it's beautiful, it's magical, right? It's amazing. Because in a matter of seconds, I went from ignorance and sort of, delight to fear and entrapment, and then back to liberation and salvation. It's incredible. It's a beautiful, beautiful moment in the story, in the movie. The problem is, I was always way more afraid of my brother than I was of Andrew. I never knew what Andrew was capable of, right? With him, it was all reputation around town. My brother, oh my goodness, my brother was so much bigger than me, so much stronger than me. He knew so many bad words. He was definitely scary. But as it turned out, he was also nice, right? He saved me outside of the house where he didn't have to. My dad wasn't even there telling him he had to do it. And then he and his buddies took me to the store and got me a bunch of candy with the money they got from Andrew's milk jugs, which was also pretty funny. So it's one of those moments in life where you learn a lesson, and you only have to learn it once. As a matter of fact, you can only learn it once. And the younger you are when you learn it, the better off you are. And when you learn it from a sibling, it's beautiful. When you realize that everybody has the ability to either be nice or funny or scary. And so the film ends, the scene ends, with a 9-year-old me, sitting on the curb outside of the convenience store with a bunch of teenagers, drinking cream soda and eating wig-wag bars. And I think to myself, I wonder if Andrew's ever nice. I wonder if he's ever funny. Fade to black. Roll credits. Thanks for listening. All right. By way of introduction, I should say, Stephen introduced me. My name's Brad Woods. I'm from Guelph. And the one thing I always want to make really clear, I wanted to start with a story because we're going to come back to that story. But the one thing I wanted to make really clear this morning is that I am not a minister or a pastor or a preacher or anything like it. I'm just a storyteller. And that's why I'm here today, is to tell stories and to talk about stories. Now, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel from the pulpit. I'm not trying to do this just for the sake of being different. I'm certainly not suggesting that stories and storytelling is more important than preaching or teaching. As a matter of fact, in the few conversations I've had with Steve, it sounds like you're in pretty good hands when it comes to preaching and teaching. But I would argue that stories and storytelling are an essential part of the Christian faith. And they're a significant part of the biblical narrative. And so, therefore, they're worth talking about and worth considering. Like, we can go all the way back to, when we talk about storytelling, we're going to go all the way back to the book of Judges, the Old Testament. Judges 9, verses 7 to 11. I didn't do that. When Jotham was told about this, he climbed up on the top of Mount Gerizim and shouted to them, "Listen to me, citizens of Shechem, so that God may listen to you. One day, the trees went out to anoint a king for themselves." So he breaks into a folk tale, right? He needs to teach people a lesson, uses a folk tale. "They said to the olive tree, 'Be our king.' But the olive tree answered, 'Should I give up giving oil, which both gods and humans are honored, to hold sway over the trees?' Next, the trees said to the fig tree, 'Come, be our king.' But the fig tree replied, should I give up my fruit, so good, so sweet, to hold sway over the trees? And then the trees said to the vine, come, be our king. But the vine answered, should I give up my vine, which cheers both gods and humans, to hold sway over the trees? And finally, all the trees said to the thorn bush, come and be our king. And the thorn bush said to the trees, if you really want to anoint me king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, then let fire come out of the thorn bush and consume the cedars of Lebanon. I love that way back then, right, we're using folk tales. You could also go as far into the New Testament as the book of Acts. This is when Paul, the Apostle Paul, St. Paul, probably not sainted yet, has been arrested, and they want to know, they're plotting to kill him, and they want to know what his deal is, what's his message, why is he proclaiming the story of Jesus. And in chapter 22, verse 1 to 5, when he's been given an opportunity to get up and to preach and to teach, instead, in the message at the beginning of this section, the book The Message, the Eugene Peterson version, it says Paul tells his story. I just want to read this little bit. When they were all silent, he said to them, brothers and fathers, listen now to my defense. When they heard him speak in Aramaic, they became very quiet. Then Paul said, I'm a Jew, born in Taris of Cilicia, but brought up in this city. I studied under Gamaliel and was thoroughly trained in the law of our ancestors. I was just as zealous for God as any of you are today. I persecuted the followers of this way to their death, arresting both men and women, throwing them into prison, as the high priest and all the council can themselves testify. I even obtained letters from them to their associates in Damascus and went there to bring these people as prisoners to Jerusalem to be punished. It's the Old Testament, the New Testament, personal stories, folk tales. Of course, when we think about storytelling in the Bible, we often think of the parables and Jesus, right, who told stories, the prodigal son, the good Samaritan, the persistent widow, the crooked judge, all these great stories. And they are good. There's a great, in the message, Eugene Peterson's version in Matthew 13 says, all Jesus did that day was tell stories, a long storytelling afternoon. So clearly it's a part of the message all the way through. Now in that story Jotham tells, it's in what's called the Septuagint, which is the Hebrew Bible. And it sort of opens up questions of covenant theology and maybe theodicy and how horrible things can happen if the thorn bush does indeed become the king. And when we read Paul's letter, or hear Paul's story, we're not yet even reading his letters, this thing that become the Pauline letters, right? I think there's 13 of them. And he's heavy-handed with his doctrines of incarnation and Trinitarianism. And even with Jesus, when we hear his stories, as soon as Jesus opens his mouth, we're have to consider the study of Christology and the new covenant, and eventually eschatology. Now, those are all big, fancy words, and which, whatever, and they're good, they're fun to learn, they're fun to study. But it's really important to remember, I think, that before all that, they're just stories. Right? When Jotham tells his story, there is no theodicy, there is no covenant theology. It's a story about making good choices. When Paul told his story, there is no doctrine of Trinitarianism. His is just a story of his experience. It's about connecting with people. And certainly when Jesus talks, there's no eschatology. As a matter of fact, there's not even any theology. Theology is what we've made up to understand the stories. Right? It's the stories that come first. I want to read one of my favorite authors is a guy named Frederick Buechner, an American theologian. I want to read what he says about theology. He says, theology is the study of God and his ways. For all we know, dung beetles may study us in our ways and call it humanology. If so, we would probably be more touched and amused than irritated. And one hopes that God feels likewise. So Jesus is not telling these stories. None of these guys are telling stories to seminary students and doctoral candidates, right? Jesus is telling stories to workers and to farmers and to businessmen. He's telling stories about workers and farmers and businessmen. Eugene Peterson refers to his parables as unpretentious stories about crooks and manure. He was just telling stories to help people understand God, right? Whether we're talking about making good choices like Jotham, or talking about our experience so people understand our faith, or we have somebody like Jesus, who I say they're just stories. And of course, Jesus has a better inside scoop on us than the stories as the incarnate Son of God. But they're still just stories. We sometimes get hooked up so much more on bigger ideas and trying to break them down instead of just listening to the stories. I want to read another quote from Eugene Peterson. He says, Jesus takes the time to tell stories that prepare his followers to bring the ordinariness of their lives into conscious awareness and participation in the kingdom life. Jesus announces to his disciples that he's going, actually, that's good enough. I'm going to read that again. Jesus takes the time to tell stories that prepare his followers to bring the ordinariness of their lives into conscious awareness and participation in the kingdom life. So that's why stories are important. That's why your story is important. I know you're going through a series this summer of getting people to tell stories, tell their stories, right? And our stories are important. Our stories are what connect us and help us know and be known, right? They're the connective tissue between us. So I want to ask a question. When I told the story about the bully, the story about Andrew, I'm going to put you on the spot, hopefully. You seem like nice people. I hope you don't mind. Where were you in that story? Could you imagine yourself in that story when it was happening? Or even more specifically, the street it was on. Did you picture a specific street? Yeah. Can you tell me what it was? Do you mind?
Junior Street at Huron.
Awesome. Awesome. Was it a guy named Andrew? Anybody else? What about the store? Did anybody picture a specific store from their childhood? Yeah? Do you remember the name of the store? Awesome. I love it. Yeah? Circle K. You don't have to put your hand up. You can just yell out. We're not in school. It's summer holidays. And what about where were you during the actual story? I got a couple people talking, so I'm hoping to get a couple more here. Are you watching from behind, across the street, out the window as it happens? Did anybody picture themselves that way? Yes. Where?
I was on the other side of the street watching.
Did you help me? Were you willing to? No, I'm just kidding. You were going to come again. Anybody else have anything they want to say about where they were during the story? You felt like you were me. Awesome. Awesome. Remember that. Remember that two people said that. Something here?
I was right behind you.
Right. Awesome. Excellent. When I do workshops, I often ask people that, and some people say I was one of the guys on the bike. Some people say they were up above, looking down, unrealistic, but that bird's eye view, because you give them permission of a movie, you can see it from any angle, in a window, in a house, watching it across the street. There's so many things. I talk about being in story. I think we belong in story. I think that's why they connect us. I think that's why Jotham and Paul and Jesus always told stories. It's why I want to tell stories. I come from storytelling from a love of listening to stories. I love to hear other people's stories. That's why I love to tell stories. But we belong in stories. It's where we can make sense of things. I often think of this idea that when we're watching a movie or reading a book or seeing a play, if it's good, we want to know how it ends, right? When we're halfway through, we know how it gets to the halfway point, but we don't know where it's going necessarily. And so we keep watching because we want to know how it ends, right? And it's the same. It's the same in our life, right? Most of us know where we were born. Most of us know who named us, and we can say how we got to where we are today. We don't know where we're going. We have plans, big plans, small plans, plans for lunch after this, and plans for this week and next year and all those things, but we don't know for sure. And so if it's going well, we keep trying to go. And if it's not going well, we try to change it, but we keep going in the story. And then you could even go bigger in the creation story. If we believe the Bible, we know creation, we can follow history to today. We have ideas of what's going to happen from history, from prophets, from all kinds of things, but we don't know for sure, and we keep on living. So we belong in story. We're sort of creatures of story. Like I said, they help us know and be known, and they're the connective tissue between us. Our stories are where we fit into the gospel. Like, we often think of the gospel as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but clearly, it's Jotham telling stories. It's everybody through the Bible that tell their stories. The regular guys telling regular stories, regular people, telling regular stories. And I think that's why it's so important to tell stories. When Stephen told me what he's doing this summer and trying to encourage people to tell their stories, it's exciting for me to think that. I was once at a pastor's conference presenting on storytelling, and one of the guys came up to me after my session and said, "This is really good." He was from Calgary, and he said, "When I go home, I think I'm really going to start considering storytelling." And I thought, what on earth are you doing as a pastor if you're not telling stories? You've based your career on this book that's just full of stories. And these ideas of theology are amazing because it's how we make sense of the stories, but we have to remember that the story is what's first. And that's why I told that story first thing this morning about the bully. Because it's not really about a bully. Or it's certainly not about that bully. I told that story because everybody has been bullied, or at least been scared, right? And everybody, unfortunately, has probably bullied somebody, whether you know it or not, or maybe scared somebody, or worried somebody, or did something horrible or regrettable, right? We all have, all of us. We've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. That's what that story is about. It's about not how different and scary he was, but about how similar we are, how similar I am to him, in reflecting on the curb. That's what the story's about, and that's why they're important to tell. And so I encourage this. I couldn't encourage you more to tell your stories and listen when others are telling theirs, right? To be listening for the stories that are being told. I have another story I want to tell. But before, I like having a time of Q&A. I hope that's okay. Some of you have shown me that you're willing to reach out or speak up. And I also want to make sure I'm clear in what I'm trying to say. So if it's not, this is an opportunity to question or comment anything that I've already brought up or that's been mentioned here today. So I just leave it open for a minute if anybody has any questions or comments, anything they want to ask or say. Did I ever follow up on him? I spent a lot of years scared of him. No, I don't know what became of him. I don't know what became of him. He was a year younger. My brother, who's a year older than Andrew, has way more stories about him than I did, but he did chase us around the neighborhood an awful lot. I don't know what became of Andrew. It's a great question, eh? I think maybe that's part of what's great about a story like that, or hopefully, maybe that's grace, that I can go, I wonder if he is nice, I wonder if he is funny, because then I can grow up not being mad at him or worried about him, and just hope, like true hope, that he found a way not to be so scary, that he was able to change, that the niceness and the funniness was more powerful than the scariness. Because unfortunately, it's in all of us. So we pray against the bad and hope for the good. I should look him up. Maybe I'm scared too. Maybe I'm still a little bit scared. I'm still on Facebook. I'll check. Let's see.
That's a real story from your life.
Sorry?
That's a real story from your life.
Yes. I would.
What street was it on?
What street was it on? Dunedin. That was in Oakville. That's the other thing I like. Sometimes when I tell a story, I don't like using names, because if there was a bully in your life that wasn't named Andrew, you might not picture him or her. If I say Andrew, you might picture somebody named Andrew, and it's different. So often I don't use specific names or street names. But the store was called Trio Mart, and it was on Dunedin, the street. I could take you right in front of the house it happened in, and I knew who lived there. The Clarks lived in that house. And that's when I ask people, I love hearing stuff like that specific streets and stores and people because it just proves what I think is a good point, that we belong in story, that it takes us right back to another time and place. Yeah. I would say it's 100% true, but the reality is it's a long time ago. I don't know how many milk jugs he had. And he probably said something meaner than what I would say behind the mic at a church. There's probably some good curse words in there.
Brad, sometimes people tell a story and it's kind of boring.
What are you saying, Stephen?
What's a quick tip or a suggestion you might have?
So it's a great question. I always think the two most important things about storytelling are authenticity and integrity, right? So you have to believe it too. You have to want to tell it. And I love if a story sounds like it's off the cuff, as if I'm just remembering it in the moment. But the reality is I practice stories. Now, it's different when you've been given an opportunity. And I don't take this lightly. This is why I want to take a moment to pray at the beginning. This is why I want to have a Q&A, because I think I take this very seriously, that you would give me an opportunity to tell stories to your community. And so I want it to go well. And these are stories that are well rehearsed. Laying in bed last night on the drive here, going over them in my head. It's not off the cuff because it means something to me. So if you have a story to tell for a really specific reason, I would always encourage practicing it and rehearsing it. Even if it's something like, you're driving to the cafe or the pub to meet your friends and you're like, that thing that happened last night was so funny. I can't wait to tell everyone. There's no crime in going over it in your head. You want to just be talking, but at the same time, it's nice to think about what you're going to say. But so I guess preparedness. But there's something, the stories you want to tell are the ones that will land because they mean something to you. And I think you and I talked about this before. There's a universality to good stories. There's a quote, again, from Frederick Buechner. He said, no matter who you are, no matter how eloquent or otherwise, if you tell your story with enough candor and concreteness, it will be a good story. And on some level, a universal story. And so that story isn't really about a bully at all. It's about realizing that we're all the same. I use the format of bullying to tell that, but that's not really what it's about. Those trees, it's not really about giving fruit and oil. It's about whether or not you'd be a good king. Right? This might not go well. So I would say I have two answers to that, and it's part of the same thing. And this isn't rigged. That's a legit question. She's never asked me that before. She's actually shown very little interest in my storytelling. I'm just kidding. We have a 5-hour drive still today. So stories that stick with you are the ones that stick with me, are the ones I want to tell. Like, I don't know how long I've been telling that story about Andrew, but obviously it was my story long before I was telling it publicly in front of people. It was just one of those stories that stuck with me. And every once in a while it would come up and people would laugh or agree or something, and then you start going, oh, that might be one of those stories that I can craft into something else. But at the same time, because it stuck around, because there's things that stick around, you're like, why did that resonate with me? What is it about that story? This year I'm telling a new story about the night my grandmother passed away. And it's how my mom and my aunt reacted. And it's stuck with me now for, I guess that's probably 12 years ago. And I realize it's how beautifully patient they both are. It's actually a story about patience. But I think the stories that stick with me and that I think of, why do I keep wanting to tell that? Or why do I keep thinking about that? Why does that one, I want to say haunt me, but I don't mean it in a bad way. But why does it stick around? Right? Even we're visiting with our nephew Eric, who graciously hosted us last night and will be taking us out to lunch. This is the first he's hearing of that. And we get there and, we start telling a couple stories. We're sitting in his backyard and Sylvia started telling him something. You went, oh, I know this one. This is so funny. Yeah, go ahead. Tell that again. I can't remember how it ends. Or he told us something about a hunting trip. And I'm like, oh yeah, you told me that. And some of them are like, not bad that I've heard them before. It's almost good. Like, oh, I love this. Yeah, this is so funny. I want to hear it again. These stories that stick with you are stories that are worth telling. And then you think about what is it that resonates with me. And ironically, like I never thought that. For 15, 20, 30, 40 years, whatever it was, that, oh yeah, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. He's one of us. He's not the enemy. It's not us and them. Andrew and I are the same. And my brother that saved us is the same. We're all part of that same thing of scary, nice, and funny. And hopefully we can soften the edges around whichever one of those things dominates. But it's neat when you do find something. As a Christian, it's neat when you find something that, speaks to a biblical thing as well about it. Right on. That's great. I appreciate the questions. Does anybody else? So with all due respect, you're wrong. But I mean that. Like I was recently, or not recently, it was a while ago now, but I have a story about getting a flat tire near Marathon, not far from here. And, it was a crazy thing, and our kids were young at the time, and 3 kids in the station wagon, and couldn't get the spare off, and we were saved by a bunch of 6 guys on Harley Davidsons. This bicycle gang came along, and you can look that one up. It's in the Globe and Mail. It's still available online if you want to hear how that one ends. But I remember going to a show once, and I was performing with a group of musicians, and I said to one of the guys I performed with, I don't know if I should tell that story, because I don't know if this audience has been to Northwestern Ontario. I don't know if they'll get the references and the places and all that. And he said, well, that doesn't matter. It's not about getting a flat tire. It's got nothing to do with the guys on Harleys. It's about getting out of a bad situation, and everybody has gotten out of a bad situation. So those stories, that's why I use that Buechner quote about universalism. Stories are rarely about what they're about, especially because if I tell you a story about Andrew, I have no idea what your childhood was like with bullies or bullying or anything, and so I have no idea how you hear that story. I can only tell my perspective. So what you bring to the table is very different than what I do, and so you're going to inevitably hear it differently. And so I think stories that stick with you are going to be worth telling, because there's a reason they stand out to you, and are they're rarely about what we're doing. Even as I said, we were sitting around Eric's last night. One thing reminds you of another, and my story was nothing like the one he told before me, but it reminds you of something else, and that's why I call it connective tissue, right? And then we open ourselves to each other through our stories. Yeah, I bet. I believe it. That's good. Anybody else? Yes.
Would you like to share any technical things to help the audience receive a story?
Come with a massive photo of yourself.
That's an icebreaker?
That's an icebreaker. So experiences, that's sort of, confidence comes with experience. When I always think it's a good thing, if I could see videos or hear recordings of myself when I started telling stories publicly, I'm sure it would be horrifically embarrassing. But I want to tell stories. I like listening to stories so much that I wanted to tell stories. And so I looked for opportunities, and then opportunities started coming to me, but that only comes with confidence and experience. And so there's no right and wrong way to tell a story. There's good and bad ways, but there's no right and wrong way, because it's your story. So it has to be your voice. You have to tell it your way. Like if somebody hears that story about Andrew and thinks, I love that, they maybe can't go tell it. Like you could go home today and say to somebody, I heard a story about a bully, this guy who was saved by his brother. But you can't really say it happened to you. It wouldn't fit right? You have to have your own story. So yeah, I think if you want to tell stories, and unfortunately you don't really have an option, because we're all storytellers. This is what we do as humans, right? Whether it's, not everybody likes to be on the stage behind a microphone, but at bedsides and hospital bedrooms and around the table at the cafe or the pub or the water cooler or the way to work, commuting together, we're constantly telling stories. There's always something that happens during my day that I think, I can't wait to tell Sylvia that. There's always a story we want to tell each other. It's just, we have to choose where and when we want to tell stories. I heard someone say, before there was airplanes, there were no airplane crashes, meaning that technology led to some bad things. But the truth is, we can visit our family around the world in a matter of hours. So there's also some great stuff from that technology. And so technology is unavoidable. There's great ways to tell stories online. There's great ways. I was once asked to do something for Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto, and the kids that were so sick that couldn't come to the area where we were performing, they were able to, send the stories to them on these tiny little monitors, and there was some really cool technology they were using. I mean, what I love is I don't even like being up here. I would have rather been on the floor. I feel a little removed. I like the idea of being eye to eye and knee to knee with people when I'm telling stories. I'm not being critical of this. I get it. It's the deal today. But so there's incredible ways to use anything. TikTok. I'm not on TikTok or Instagram or anything, but I would shudder to say it's horrible, it's the enemy. There's horrible things that are happening with social media. There's no question. But it doesn't mean it's, unfortunately, I think that's because of people, not because of technology. So there's great ways to spread good stories through technical means, for sure. When our kids were little, I remember them watching the Disney version of The Jungle Book. And the 20-foot, I think he's a 20-foot rock python named Kaa, and he's got a crazy lisp and the crazy eyes and everything. And everybody's terrified of him. And my oldest, and he was very young at the time, said, "Why is everyone so scared of that snake?" So I read him the original Kipling story, which in that story, he's terrifying. It's an amazing book. So I kind of thought Disney movies were a great gateway drug into incredible literature for him. Right? It didn't stop there. It just opened his world and his imagination to better things. And Mary Poppins was the same way. I remember my kids asking, "Why do they all respond like that to her?" And I said, "Well, because in the book, they're terrified of her. She's got all these secret powers." And we read those Travers books, and my kids were like smitten with that stuff. Because the movies water it down a bit. I can't see a clock, and I didn't bring a thing up. Okay, do I need to stop? Do I have time to? Pretty soon? Okay. All right, can I tell a story to end? All right. I'll tell I'll tell the one I referenced before. I'll change my plan because of running out of time. My grandmother ended up in a long-term care facility about a 20-minute drive from where my mom lived. Now, my dad was gone by this point, and my mother only had one sibling, lived in Gibsons off the island in Victoria. I'm the youngest of three boys. Well, we did what we could to help. The lion's share of my grandmother's care fell on my mom. And so she went in to see her one day, and the nurse said to her, "Yeah, it doesn't look good. We think she could go any day. You should probably call your sister." So my mom called my aunt, and they made some plans and made some arrangements, and within about 36 hours, they were all three sitting around her bed, holding hands, trying to figure out how to say goodbye, and waiting. And that's the night my grandmother passed away, sometime after midnight. So the nurse told them that the protocol there was that they would leave the body in the bed, and a doctor would be there first thing in the morning to complete the death certificate. And the nurse suggested that they go home and get some rest. But the two of them decided instead that they would wait. By about 2 a.m, they're kind of feeling, they're tired, they're giddy, they're silly, and they're really, really hungry. And so my aunt got out her phone. This is kind of where the story gets good. It's become kind of a family favorite. So my aunt got out her phone and found a 24-hour pizza place with delivery. And they called and ordered a pizza. And while they were waiting for the pizza guy, my mom went down to her car in the parking lot to see if she had any snacks. And she came up about 5 minutes later with a bottle of wine. She, in retirement, she had taken to keeping wine in the car. Not in the front seat, not in the front seat. She kept a bottle of wine in the trunk in case she was ever out and got invited to stick around for dinner. Then she wasn't empty-handed. It's actually a good strategy if anybody wants to employ it. It's a good move. And you won't owe me anything. So now by 3 a.m, there's an empty pizza box, a deceased nonagenarian, and 2 women in their 70s drinking red wine out of coffee cups that they snuck out of the nurse's station, and they're literally howling at the moon. They're singing old songs and arguing about old stories. My mom said that they laughed and laughed and laughed until all they could do was cry. And then they would cry and cry and cry until they started laughing again. She said that went on all night. At one point, the overnight nurse had to come in and tell them to be quiet or she was going to kick them out because they had woken up everybody else on the floor. Apparently, the old guy across the hall thought he was having night terrors. I always imagine them standing there like two schoolgirls in front of the principal, hiding their drinks behind their back and kicking pizza crusts under the bed while the nurse is giving them what for. It's funny, eh? It seems like all we do is wait. Wait for an answer, wait for a solution, wait to become who we think we're meant to be, when really, how we wait is who we are. Steve, thanks so much for the offer and the opportunity. Thank you all for being here, and thanks so much for listening.